Good afternoon once more, 2024 matriculants. Now we are on the final lesson on source-based questions. You must be attentive enough during this one because it is directly discussing how to ascertain biasness or limitation. We know, learners, that you do have a challenge when it comes to the limitation of the source. Now on my slide, I'm providing guidelines on ascertaining the limitation of a source, which is also a level 3 question. Also here, we must look who is the author in the context of being relevant to the topic under discussion, the date of the source, is it far removed from the time of an event? You must note well, a biased source only gives that person's perspective on the event in question. I would like to highlight this one so that learners pay attention. A biased source only gives that person's perspective on the event in question. In other words, a biased source, it is not giving you the full picture. It is only giving that person's perspective. A biased source, it contains a lot of emotive language. It contains a lot of emotional language. I want us to highlight that because the example below will show exactly like that. If there's a hint, it might be exaggerated. So, let me repeat, a biased source shows a lot of emotional language. If there's a hint, that emotional language, it might be exaggerated. The next slide will show you exactly what I'm talking about. Let's look at this particular source. It's from the civil rights movement. Source 3A, the source below has been extracted from an interview with Reverend Joseph L. Wagner in 1985, a white Lutheran minister who was part of the committee that organized the 1963 Birmingham campaign. Birmingham. What is Birmingham? Learners must know that Birmingham is a city in America. Birmingham in 1963 was about as segregated a city in South as you can find. In other words, segregation was rife in this city. There were still signs over the water fountains. There were no black clerks in the downtown stores. Now learners can understand that segregation was rife. Even the jobs that are unskilled, they were given whites, not African Americans or blacks. There were no blacks in police or fire department. And there were a lot of open threats on the part of the police commissioner, Bill Connor, against any attempt to gain some of these rights. In other words, the police commissioner did not want black people to have rights. So he wanted to maintain segregation at all costs. There was not only the belief in the white community that blacks were inferior, but that belief was clearly articulated, was assumed as the basis for segregation that existed all these years. So the white in this town, so they emphasized that black Americans were inferior to the whites. This indicates that segregation was rife in this particular city. Many members of the Ku Klux Klan had almost a religious belief in their hearts that we got to maintain that kind of purity or race, otherwise we are dooming ourselves on our future generation. So what is this Ku Klux Klan? It was the white racist group. We did not want to mingle with blacks because they want to maintain the purity of white race at all cost. As we think about white people we're afraid of in terms of the possibility of an integrated society, part of it was simply the fear of the unknown. In other words, they did not want or fear the possibility of an integrated society. The fear of Ku Klux Klan and their threats becoming a reality. In Birmingham, we had sometimes like 40 bombings in the previous 10 years. So it was not an idle threat. So there were 40 bombings in the previous 10 years. My role in the Birmingham demonstration was being a part of the committee of 20 that met to do the planning. Remember, it was his role of Joseph. He was part of the committee that was doing the planning, a committee of 20. I can still remember those sessions with Dr. King and Ralph Albertney and Andre Young. It was an amazing experience of an openness towards everybody's ideas. There was no one who was not given the opportunity to help participate in the planning. So he is discussing his experience. He was part of this committee of 20, which was planning the Birmingham campaign. Let's look on the next slide. Here we find there's cartoon analysis. Remember a level 2 question. I said you are going to interpret a cartoon. What is the caption of this cartoon? Without the Marshall Plan, your bread would be bare. So you cannot say in this particular source the message that conveyed is bread. No. You have to interpret what you see on this visual source. And so your children. So what this source is saying, without the Marshall Plan, your bread will be bare. There will be no rama, there will be no butter. And so your children will starve. You see there, your children are poor. Now, look on your left-hand side. This source is a cartoon by Joe Spire. It was published in a booklet that was printed by the government of Netherlands in November 1949. So now, learners must know when was this source published. It was published in 1949. Now, let's look at the questions on the next slide. To answer the questions, you are required to explain and clarify information in a source, interpret the message the creator is trying to expose. In other words, you must interpret what that visual source, which says, without the Marshall Plan, your bread would be bare, and so as your children. In some instances, you could be asked to expose the creator's messages by using evidence to substantiate your response. In this case of a visual source, cartoon, poster, or photograph, you will have to explain. So now a learner knows what we talk about when we talk about a visual source. It may be a cartoon, a poster, a photograph, or a graph. What you see in the picture, that is the literary meaning. You must be able to understand what you see on that bread when it says, without the Marshall Plan, your bread will be bare. As well as the symbolic meaning of what you see. What is the figurative meaning? Because the interpretation It means you must come with the figurative meaning of a source. What are the limitations of this source? The author, that is the cartoonist, identifies himself with the Marshall Plan. That is one response that we're expecting. Now, Elena will not say that the cartoonist identifies himself with the Marshall Plan. The author will say that, the Elena will say that the author supports the Marshall Plan. Then Elena will get 2 marks. That is okay. And the author negatively criticized communist countries that did not partake in the Marshall Plan. So, in other words, the author of that cartoon is a supporter of the Marshall Plan. The author of that cartoon, he is criticizing communist countries for not taking part in the Marshall Plan. Then Elena will get his or her 4 marks. 2 marks for saying that he identified himself with the Marshall Plan, and another 2 marks for knowing that negatively he is criticizing the communist countries for not being part and parcel of the Marshall Plan. The Netherlands bankrolled and published the cartoon to discredit communism. Then Elena will get another 2 marks, because on the left-hand side, it is said it was published by the government of Netherlands. Or Elena will just get 2 marks by saying that this source, it is one-sided. It is showing the Western account of events. That is another 2 marks. So this is a one-sided view account of events. The source is biased against the Soviet Union, or the source is biased against communism. So the facts are deliberately exaggerated. So in other words, this source, it was published to spread propaganda. So that's how Elena is expected to respond when is asked, comment on the limitation of the source. When you are researching about the successes of the Marshall Plan, then Elena will be able to say that this particular source, it is biased. This particular source, it is showing a one-sided view of the West. This source, it is biased against communism. Or this source, it is critical of the communist countries for not taking part and joining the Marshall Plan. Let's look at this one. It is also showing biasness. Source 2D. The source below is a poster titled Angola, Another Vietnam. It calls for the withdrawal of South Africa and the US from the Angolan conflict. Now, we can simply say so. There's the caption. It says Angola. Now the source says another Vietnam. Why is saying another Vietnam? Because these are 2 countries. There's soldiers on the Angola. Look at the emotive language that is used. Kick out South Africa. Kick out South African apartheid. Kick out US racism and imperialism. Then the learner, from the word go, he can say that, no, this source, it is biased. Now he has to look biased on which side. explain the limitation of this source to a historian researching the Angolan Civil War between 1974 and 1976. So those are the expected answers. The answer, it is pro-MPLA, that is communism. It is against capitalism. The source it uses, that emotion, languages. Kick out South Africa apartheid, kick out US imperialism. The source is used to expose aggression by soldiers from USA against Angola. In conclusion, kick out is used to exaggerate hatred towards South Africa and USA. This particular source, it is pro-communism, it is pro-MPLA. So that's where we said learners must look at the visual source. This one is clearly that it is biased because there's a lot of emotional languages that has been used. That languages has been used to exaggerate hatred towards South Africa and USA. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.